Wealthy rancher gave his worst land to his poorest son. 7 months later, he regretted it. Richard Thompson was known as the most prosperous rancher in all of Blue Ridge Valley, Montana, and that March Sunday, he decided to gather his 3 sons to make an announcement that would forever change the family's lives. When it was Michael's turn, the middle son, who had always worked in his brother's shadows, Richard pointed to the rocky, dry land at the far end of the property and declared that this barren soil was what he deserved. Michael Thompson swallowed hard as his father's words echoed across the porch of the main house. Jennifer, his wife of 7 months pregnant, discreetly squeezed his hand, trying to offer strength as silent tears streamed down her face. The ranch workers lowered their eyes, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. "Dad, are you sure?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "Absolutely, son. Robert gets the northern lands with 3 springs. William takes the west side with the best pasture in the region. And you," Richard paused dramatically, "you get that back plot. About 15 acres of rocks and dry brush." Robert, the eldest son, crossed his arms and smirked. William, the youngest, at least had the decency to look embarrassed. Michael knew that land well. It was where cattle couldn't graze, where nothing had grown for years. His own father had always called it cursed ground. "But Dad, how am I supposed to support my family with land like this?" Michael pressed, struggling to keep his composure. "Oh, Michael, you've always been the laziest of the 3. Never showed real ambition. Maybe working tough land will teach you the value of hard work," Richard replied, adjusting his leather hat over his graying hair. Jennifer abruptly stood from the wooden chair where she'd been sitting. "Excuse me," she murmured, quickly stepping inside. Michael knew she'd left to cry away from prying eyes. His wife didn't deserve this humiliation. They'd married 2 years ago against Richard's wishes. He'd thought Jennifer too plain for the Thompson family. She was the daughter of a small local farmer and had won Michael's heart with her kindness and determination. "It's settled then," Michael said, standing as well. "I'll take the land you've chosen for me." "That's what I like to hear, son. A real man can make a living from any soil." Robert let out a sarcastic chuckle. "Good luck, brother, you'll need it." That night, Michael and Jennifer were in the small house they'd built in the first months of their marriage, located near the main ranch. It was a simple 2-bedroom home with a living room, kitchen, and a small porch. Jennifer prepared the chamomile tea they always drank before bed. "Michael, we'll make it, won't we?" she asked, rubbing her rounded belly. "Of course we will, love. I don't know how yet, but we will." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, continuing. Early Monday morning, Michael borrowed old Pete's beat-up Jeep to inspect the land he'd inherited. Jennifer insisted on coming, even in her advanced pregnancy. The road there was a pothole-riddled dirt path. When they arrived, Michael stopped the car and stared at the stretch of land, now his. It was even worse than he remembered. The soil was completely parched, covered in rocks of all sizes. A few thorny bushes grew here and there, but it was clear nothing productive could thrive there. "Good Lord," Jennifer whispered. "I know it seems impossible, Jennifer, but there has to be a way. There just has to." Michael stepped out of the Jeep and began walking across the land, carefully stepping between the rocks. Jennifer stayed in the car, watching her husband with a heavy heart. Suddenly, she spotted a familiar figure approaching down the dusty road. "Mr. Michael," called a familiar voice. It was Mrs. Wilkins, the Thompsons' neighbor for over 40 years, a woman with completely white hair and a face weathered by time, known throughout the area for her wisdom and kindness. She limped slightly as she approached, leaning on a wooden cane. "Mrs. Wilkins, what a surprise to see you here," said Michael, walking back toward the Jeep. "I heard about the land division, my boy. Came to see how you were holding up." Jennifer got out of the car to greet her. "We're not doing well, Mrs. Wilkins. Just look at what my father-in-law gave us," Jennifer said, pointing at the barren land. Mrs. Wilkins studied the area carefully, her experienced eyes scanning every corner of the property. "Do you two know the story of this land?" "What story?" Michael asked, intrigued. 50 years ago, this was the most productive land in the whole region. It belonged to a man named Joseph Miller, a humble but very wise farmer. Jennifer and Michael exchanged surprised glances. "What do you mean, Mrs. Wilkins? This land has never produced anything," Michael said. "Oh, it did, my boy. It did plenty. Joseph Miller grew the finest vegetables, the best grains anyone had ever seen around here. The problem was, your grandfather, your father's father, was jealous of Joseph's success." The old woman steadied herself on her cane and continued, "Your grandfather owned nearly all the land in the area, but Joseph's small farm yielded more than any of his. It drove him mad with anger." "What happened?" Jennifer asked, fascinated by the story. "Joseph was a man of faith, didn't drink, didn't fight with anyone. All he knew was hard work and taking care of his family. But your grandfather found a way to ruin him." Mrs. Wilkins paused, looking again at the dry land. "Joseph Miller had a younger son who was no good, always in trouble, owed money to everyone. Your grandfather offered to pay off all the boy's debts in exchange for his father's land. And he sold his own father's land." Michael couldn't believe it. "He did, my boy. Joseph Miller lost everything overnight, had to leave the area with his wife and other children, died of heartbreak 2 years later." Jennifer felt a chill in her stomach hearing the story. "And the land hasn't produced anything since?" she asked. "Not since then, no. Some say it's cursed. I think it's because no one ever knew how to work it right. Joseph Miller took his secrets with him." Michael absorbed every word of the story. Suddenly, something that had seemed impossible began to make sense. If this land had once been productive, maybe it could be again. "Mrs. Wilkins, do you know where I could find anyone from Joseph Miller's family?" "Oh, my boy, that was a long time ago. But wait." She thought for a few seconds. "There's Professor James in town. He's Joseph Miller's grandson. Retired from the university but still lives around here. Where can I find him?" "Every Saturday he goes to the public library to do research. He's a very studious man, just like his grandfather was." That same afternoon, Michael and Jennifer returned home with their minds buzzing with possibilities. For the first time since Sunday, Michael felt a glimmer of hope growing in his chest. When they reached their small house, they found Robert waiting on the porch. He was leaning against the wall, chewing on a toothpick with a smirk on his face. "So, brother, given up on the cursed land yet?" "Not yet, Robert. Actually, I'm starting to think this might work out." Robert let out a loud laugh. "Work out? Michael, have you lost your mind? That's not land, it's a pile of rocks." Jennifer walked into the house without a word, leaving the brothers to talk alone. "Robert, you've always had everything handed to you. Never had to fight for anything." "Maybe this tough land will teach me things you'll never learn," said Michael, looking his brother straight in the eye. "Oh yeah? And what would those things be?" "Humility, persistence, gratitude for every small victory." Robert spat on the ground and adjusted his hat. "You sound just like Dad, full of cheap philosophy. The reality is you're going to fail, and then you'll come crawling to me and William for help." "That won't happen. Let's make a bet then. If in 6 months you can't get anything out of that land, you sell it to me for whatever price I offer." Michael hesitated for a moment. It was a risky bet, but the confidence he'd felt after talking to Mrs. Wilkins made him accept. "You're on. And if I do manage to grow something good, you apologize publicly for doubting me." Robert extended his hand to seal the deal. "Sure thing, brother. It'll be the easiest apology I never have to make." The following Saturday, Michael was at the Blue Ridge Valley Public Library at 8 in the morning. The librarian, Mrs. Fletcher, guided him to a table at the back of the room where a man in his 60s was intently reading a book on farming techniques. "Professor James?" The man looked up over his glasses. He had neatly combed gray hair and a kind face. "That's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Michael Thompson. I wanted to talk to you about your grandfather, Joseph Miller." Professor James closed the book immediately, surprise spreading across his face. "Joseph Miller was my grandfather. It's been a long time since anyone mentioned him. You're from the Thompson family?" "Yes, sir, Richard's son." The professor was silent for a few seconds, as if processing the information. "And what does Richard Thompson's son want to know about my grandfather?" Michael told the whole story. The division of the land, inheriting the cursed plot, the conversation with Mrs. Wilkins. Professor James listened carefully without interrupting. "So you inherited my grandfather's old property?" he said when Michael finished. "Yes, sir. And I really wanted to know how he managed to make that land productive." Professor James leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. "My grandfather was a man ahead of his time. He understood the land in a way few farmers did." "How so?" "He knew each type of soil has its own quirks. That land you inherited has a very specific mineral composition. It's not that it's bad, it just needs different treatment." Michael's heart raced. He was on the right track. "What kind of treatment?" "My grandfather found that soil has a lot of iron and magnesium, but little nitrogen. He developed a specific composting technique to balance those minerals." Professor James opened a folder beside his books and pulled out some yellowed pages. "After we lost the land, my grandfather never wanted to talk about farming again. But before he passed, he gave me these notes. He said maybe one day someone from the family that took our land would come asking about its secrets." Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. "He predicted this would happen?" "In a way, yes. My grandfather always said the land has a memory, and that one day it would find someone who knew how to care for it properly again." Professor James handed the pages to Michael. "These are his notes on soil preparation, the ideal planting season, and the irrigation techniques he used." Michael took the papers with trembling hands. They were handwritten in careful script, containing drawings and detailed explanations about land management. "Professor, I don't even know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You need to honor my grandfather's memory by making that land productive again. That would be the best way to right the injustice our family suffered." When Michael got home, Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing lunch. He walked in excitedly, waving the papers in the air. "Jennifer, you won't believe what happened." He told her all about his conversation with Professor James and showed her Joseph Miller's notes. Jennifer peered over his shoulder, trying to decipher the old handwriting. "Michael, this is amazing. So we have the manual for making that land productive." "Exactly. And look at this part here." Michael pointed to a specific section. He talks about an organic fertilizer mix that made plants grow 3 times faster than usual. Jennifer hugged her husband, beaming with happiness. "I knew we'd find a way." But their joy didn't last long. On Monday morning, as Michael was studying the notes at the kitchen table, he heard the sound of a truck approaching. Through the window, he saw Richard stepping out of his pickup, accompanied by Robert. "What do you think they want here?" Jennifer murmured. Father and son walked into the house without ceremony. Richard looked around with disapproval. "Michael, we need to talk." "Go ahead, Dad." "I'm worried about your situation. Talking to Robert yesterday, he told me you're wasting time studying who knows what instead of looking for a real job." Michael carefully folded the notes and tucked them into the table drawer. "Dad, I am working. I'm studying how to make my land productive." Robert rolled his eyes. "What land, Michael? That's a desert out there." "It's not a desert, Robert. It just needs proper care." Richard slammed his fist on the table. "Proper care, my foot. You're living in a dream, son. Jennifer's pregnant, you'll have more expenses, and here you are playing farmer. Dad, give me a chance. Just a few months to prove I can make it work." "A few months? Michael, you don't even have money to buy seeds. How are you going to invest in land that's never produced anything?" Jennifer, who had stayed quiet until then, stepped closer to the table. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, Michael is the hardest working man I know. If he's confident he can do this, I believe in him. Jennifer, you're a good girl, but you're being naive. You both need to face reality," Richard said, softening his tone. "The reality is, I'm going to work this land until it bears fruit, Dad. You always told me a real man doesn't give up at the first sign of trouble." Robert patted Michael on the back. "Brother, Dad's just trying to help. I can get you a job at the co-op. You'd be the sales manager. Good salary, benefits, stability. What about the land? Sell it to me. I'll pay a fair price and you'll be free of this headache." Michael looked at Jennifer, who gave a subtle shake of her head, signaling he should refuse. "Thanks for the offer, Robert, but I'm going to try working my land first." Richard stood abruptly. "Fine, Michael. But when you come asking for help, remember I offered you a solution." After they left, Michael and Jennifer stood embraced on the porch, watching the dust settle behind Richard's pickup. "Do you think we're doing the right thing, Jennifer?" "I'm sure of it, love, but it's going to be hard." "Did you see how determined your father and brother are to prove that you'll fail? Well then, let's prove them wrong." On Tuesday, Michael started putting into practice the guidance from Joseph Miller's notes. The first step was to clear the land and better analyze the soil composition. He spent the entire day removing rocks and cutting the dried vegetation covering the ground. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The work was tough and the March sun beat down mercilessly. Michael returned home at the end of the day completely exhausted, his hands full of calluses and his face sunburned. Jennifer greeted him with a glass of ice water and lots of affection. "How was the first day, honey?" "Tiring but productive. I managed to clear almost an acre. And I found something interesting." "What?" "Under all that dry vegetation and the rocks, the soil has a different color. It's darker, like it has a lot of organic matter mixed in." Jennifer smiled. "Just like Joseph Miller wrote in his notes." "Exactly like that." On Wednesday, Michael woke up at 5 in the morning and went back to work. This time he took a shovel to dig some test holes across the land. In each hole, he examined the color and texture of the soil, jotting everything down in a notebook. Around 10 in the morning, he saw a familiar figure approaching down the road. It was old Pete, the oldest farmhand, a man nearly 70 who had worked for the Thompson family for over 40 years. "Good morning, Mr. Michael. Can I have a quick word?" "Of course, Pete. What's up?" The old farmhand glanced around before speaking, as if making sure they were alone. "Mr. Michael, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I'm worried about you." "Worried about what?" "Last night, I overheard a conversation between your father and your brothers. They're making plans to buy your land." Michael stopped digging and stared at old Pete. "What kind of plans?" "Your brother Robert is spreading around town that you're struggling. He's saying Jennifer is about to have the baby, and you don't even have money for the delivery." Michael felt his blood boil. "That's a lie." "I know it is, Mr. Michael, but the folks in town don't. And your brother Robert is offering to buy the land to help you." "For how much?" "Half what it's worth, even though it's tough land." Michael drove the shovel into the ground forcefully. "Pete, thanks for telling me. I'll have a serious talk with my brother." "Mr. Michael, be careful. Your father's always favored the other two. You know that. They don't want to see you succeed." "Why not, Pete?" The old farmhand scratched his thin beard before answering. "Because if you manage to make this land productive, you'll prove the problem was never the land. The problem was always the lack of knowledge and dedication." That night, Michael told Jennifer about his conversation with old Pete. She was furious. "How dare Robert spread lies about us?" "Because he wants to force me to sell the land, Jennifer. He knows if I succeed, I'll prove I'm just as capable as he is." "So what do? We work even harder, and we'll get our first harvest in less than 6 months. On Thursday, Michael decided to follow Joseph Miller's composting instructions to the letter. According to the notes, he needed to mix aged cow manure, dried leaves, fruit peels, and one special ingredient, black locust wood ash. The problem was getting all those materials. Michael didn't have money to buy manure, and his family wouldn't help him. That's when he remembered old Samuel, a retired farmer who lived a few miles from the farm. Old Samuel was known in the area for his generosity and wisdom. At 75 years old, he had stopped working in agriculture, but still kept a few animals in his backyard. Michael borrowed old Pete's Jeep again and went to visit the old farmer. He found him sitting on the porch sipping yerba mate and watching the chickens peck at the ground. "Old Samuel, good morning. How are you?" "Michael, what a wonderful surprise, my boy. Sit down. Would you like some yerba mate?" "I'd love some, sir." Old Samuel prepared a yerba mate for Michael and waited for him to explain the reason for his visit. "Old Samuel, I came here to ask you for a favor." "Go ahead, son." Michael told him the whole story, the inheritance of the difficult land, the discovery of Joseph Miller's notes, and the plans he had made to restore the soil's productivity. Joseph Miller, old Samuel murmured. That name sounds familiar. Did you know him? I sure did, young man. I was just a boy when he still worked that land. My father always said Joseph Miller was the best farmer in the area. Do you remember anything about the techniques he used? Old Samuel thought for a moment. I remember he had some composting secrets no one else knew, and I remember his land yielded far more than anyone else's. Old Samuel, I need well-aged cow manure for composting. Can you help me? Of course, my boy. Out back I've got a big pile of manure that's been curing for over a year. Take as much as you need. Michael couldn't believe the old man's generosity. How can I pay you for the manure? You don't pay me a thing, Michael. Consider it an investment in the future. If you can make that land productive again, you'll be honoring the memory of a good man who was wronged. Old Samuel got up and walked to the back of the property, with Michael following. There was a huge pile of well-aged manure, with the distinct look and smell of high-quality organic fertilizer. Take as many loads as you need, son, and if you need anything else, just say the word. Michael drove home with the Jeep loaded with manure and his heart full of gratitude. Jennifer helped him unload the material near the land they were preparing. Michael, what is that smell? Jennifer joked, covering her nose. It's the smell of success, love, Michael replied, laughing. On Friday, Michael began preparing the compost beds, following Joseph Miller's notes exactly. It was a complex process involving alternating layers of different organic materials. First layer, aged cow manure. Second layer, dry leaves collected from under the farm's trees. Third layer, fruit peels and scraps Jennifer had set aside during the week. Fourth layer, ashes from acacia wood. Getting the acacia ashes was the trickiest part. Michael had to search for dead trees of that species in the area and burn them carefully to get the right amount of ashes. By the end of the day, he had prepared 3 compost beds, following Joseph Miller's instructions to the letter. On Saturday, Jennifer insisted on going with Michael to see how the work was coming along. She was 8 months pregnant and walked with difficulty, but she wanted to be part of the project that could change their lives. Wow, Michael, it looks so organized, she said, looking at the neatly arranged beds. According to the notes, in 3 weeks, this compost will be ready to mix into the soil. And then we can plant. Then we can plant. Jennifer sat on a rock to rest for a moment. Her belly was heavy and her legs were swollen. Michael, what if it doesn't work? It will work, Jennifer. I feel it in my heart. But what if it doesn't? We don't have any savings. The baby's coming, and your brothers are going to throw it in our faces that they were right. Michael moved closer to his wife and took her hands. Jennifer, remember when we decided to get married, even though my father was against it? I remember. Everyone said it wouldn't work, that you were too simple for me, that I was making a mistake. And look at us now, 2 years later, stronger than ever. Jennifer smiled through the tears forming in her eyes. That's true. So why would now be any different? We've always overcome hardships together. Because it's not just the two of us anymore, Michael. There's the baby. That's exactly why I have to make this work. I want our child to grow up seeing that his father never gave up, even when everyone doubted him. Just then, they heard the sound of approaching horses. It was Robert and William, riding in from the ranch, heading straight for them. Well, if it isn't the most famous farmers in the valley, Robert said sarcastically. William dismounted and walked over to the compost beds. What's all this, Michael? Organic fertilizer. I'm prepping the soil for planting. Robert burst out laughing. Organic fertilizer? Brother, this looks more like a dump. That's how it has to be at first, Michael replied, trying to stay calm. Michael, listen, William said, his tone turning serious. Dad's really worried about you two. Jennifer's about to have the baby. You've got no income, and here you are playing in the dirt. I'm not playing, William. I'm working. Working? Shoveling manure is work. Robert swung back onto his horse. Michael, you've got 1 week to take our buyout offer. After that, it's off the table. What offer? We'll buy this land for $15,000. It's enough for you to move to town and start fresh. Michael knew $15,000 was far less than the land was worth, even if it was tough to work. And if I refuse, then you're on your own. No asking Dad for help, no borrowing money or equipment, Robert said. Jennifer struggled to her feet. Robert, William, have you no shame? Taking advantage of us like this? Jennifer, we're trying to help you, William replied. Help? Offering half what the land's worth? That's help? Robert tugged the reins. 1 week, Michael. 1 week. After they rode off, Michael and Jennifer stood in silence for a few minutes. His brother's ultimatum had added even more pressure to an already difficult situation. Michael, can they really cut off all family support? They can, and they probably will. Then we need money for the birth expenses and for seeds. I know, Jennifer, but I won't sell the land. There's got to be another way. On Monday, Michael woke up determined to find a solution. He'd spent all Sunday calculating costs, seeds for 2 acres, medical bills for the birth, and enough to keep the family afloat for 3 months. The only option he saw was finding part-time work in town, something that wouldn't force him to abandon the land entirely. He caught the early bus to Bozeman and spent the day job hunting. He checked auto shops, hardware stores, general service companies. Everywhere the answer was the same: no openings, or the jobs required full-time hours. By evening, discouraged and exhausted, Michael stopped at a diner for coffee before heading home. That's when he overheard a conversation at the next table that caught his attention. "The problem is finding someone reliable to take care of the property on weekends," said a middle-aged man. "It's really difficult, Dr. Anderson, especially someone who understands plants," replied a woman. Michael approached the table. "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. Are you looking for someone to take care of plants?" The man, who appeared to be in his 50s and wore expensive clothes, looked Michael up and down. "We are. Do you have experience with gardening?" "I have experience with farming in general. I'm working on a soil recovery project using organic techniques." Dr. Anderson seemed interested. "What kind of techniques?" Michael briefly explained the project he was developing, mentioning the composting and organic management techniques he had learned. "Interesting. I have a small ranch here near Bozeman, 50,000 square feet, with gardens, an orchard, and an organic vegetable patch. The problem is I work a lot during the week and can only go there on weekends." "And you need someone to take care of everything during the week?" "Exactly. Someone who understands plants, knows when to water, prune, and fertilize. Are you interested?" Michael could hardly believe the coincidence. "I'm very interested. What would the work hours be?" "Monday to Friday, from 7 in the morning to noon, 5 hours a day. I pay $1,200 a month, plus transportation allowance." It was exactly what Michael needed, a part-time job that still left the afternoon free to work on his own land. "I accept, Dr. Anderson." "Great. Can you start tomorrow?" "I can." Dr. Anderson handed him a card with his phone number and the ranch address. "One important thing: I highly value responsibility and attention to detail. If you do a good job, aside from the fixed salary, I'll give you a performance bonus." When Michael got home that night, Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing dinner. He walked in excited, waving Dr. Anderson's card. "Jennifer, I got a job." "Really? Where?" Michael told her all about the chance meeting at the diner and Dr. Anderson's offer. $1,200 a month isn't much, but it's enough for us to get by until our land starts producing," Jennifer said. "And the best part is I'll only work 5 hours a day. That leaves time to take care of our land in the afternoon." "Michael, this is God's hand helping us." On Tuesday, Michael started working at Dr. Anderson's ranch. The place was truly impressive. A large house surrounded by well-kept gardens, an orchard with various fruit trees, and an organic vegetable garden producing greens and vegetables. The work mostly involved watering the plants, light pruning, cleaning the beds, and monitoring crop growth. For Michael, who was studying organic farming, it was like getting hands-on training every day. On his first day, he met Mrs. Johnson, a 60-year-old woman who worked as the ranch's caretaker. She lived in a small house at the back of the property and knew all the secrets of the garden. "You're the new young man who'll take care of the plants?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "Yes, ma'am." "My name is Michael." Mrs. Johnson to friends. How long have you been working in farming? Actually, I'm still learning. I have some land I'm trying to restore using organic techniques. Mrs. Johnson's eyes lit up. Organic techniques? How interesting. I've worked only with organic farming for over 20 years. Could you teach me a few things? Of course, my boy. Organic farming is my passion. During the first few days of work, Mrs. Johnson became a true teacher to Michael. She taught him about different types of natural fertilizers, pesticide-free pest control methods, and crop rotation techniques. Michael, the land is like a person, Mrs. Johnson would say, as they worked in the garden. It has different needs at different times. You need to learn how to talk to it. Talk to it how? By observing the signs it gives, the color of the soil, the texture, the smell, how the plants behave. These are all messages the land sends to those who know how to interpret them. Michael soaked up every word from Mrs. Johnson like a sponge. He carefully noted every technique she taught to apply to his own land. At the end of the first week of work, Dr. Anderson visited the farm to see how Michael was doing. Mrs. Johnson, how's the new employee? Dr. Anderson, this young man is a blessing. I've never seen anyone so eager to learn and so careful with the plants. Is that so, Michael? Dr. Anderson turned to him. Mrs. Johnson doesn't praise just anyone. I'm really enjoying the work, Dr. Anderson, and I'm learning so much that I can use for my own project. What project is that? Michael told him about the land he'd inherited and the challenge of making it productive again. Interesting. You know I'm a veterinarian, right? I've always been interested in sustainable farming. If you really manage to restore degraded land, I'd love to see the results. You're welcome to visit any time, Dr. Anderson. That weekend, Michael returned to his land with many new ideas he'd learned from Mrs. Johnson. The compost he'd prepared 3 weeks earlier looked perfect, dark, smelling of damp earth with a crumbly texture. Jennifer, look at the compost, Michael said, holding up a handful. Wow, it's so different from when you first made it. Now it's time to mix it with the soil and prepare the beds for planting. Michael spent all of Saturday and Sunday mixing the organic compost with the rocky soil. It was hard work, done with a hoe and shovel, but with every turn, he could see the soil becoming darker and looser. On Monday, when he arrived at Dr. Anderson's farm, Mrs. Johnson immediately noticed his excitement. What's got you so happy, Michael? Mrs. Johnson, over the weekend I finished preparing the land. Now I can start planting. And what will you plant first? According to my notes, it's best to start with fast-growing greens, lettuce, arugula, cilantro. Good choice. Those plants are great for testing soil quality. If they grow well, it means you did everything right. Mrs. Johnson went to a corner of the garden and picked up some seeds drying in the sun. Take these seeds, Michael. They're from curly lettuce I grew myself. It's a very hardy and flavorful variety. Mrs. Johnson, you don't have to... Yes, I do, my boy. When you harvest your first greens, I want to taste them to see if they turned out well. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. That afternoon, Michael planted his first seeds in the land he'd restored. It was an exciting and frightening moment at the same time. All the months of work, study, and investment were being put to the test. Jennifer joined him in planting, even with her belly heavy from pregnancy. Michael, how long until we know if it worked? For the greens to sprout, about a week. To see if they'll grow well, about 3 weeks. And if it doesn't work? It will, Jennifer. But deep down, Michael was nervous too. What if all the techniques he'd learned didn't work? What if the land really was cursed, like everyone said? The next day, Robert showed up at Michael's house bright and early, before he left for work. So, brother, have you thought about our offer? I have, Robert, and the answer is no. Michael, you're being stubborn. Jennifer could go into labor any day now, you don't have money, and you're still clinging to this fantasy of making the land produce. It's not a fantasy, Robert. I've already planted the first seeds. Robert let out a mocking laugh. Planted seeds? In that cursed land? Michael, you've really lost your mind. I haven't lost my mind, and you'll see. Fine, but don't come asking for help when things get tough. That Friday, something happened that completely changed Michael's plans. Jennifer started feeling the first contractions. "Michael, I think it's time," she said, bracing herself against the kitchen wall. Michael rushed to grab the bag they'd prepared weeks earlier and took Jennifer to the hospital in Blue Ridge Valley. The labor lasted 8 hours but went smoothly. John Michael Thompson was born at 3 in the morning on Saturday, weighing 7 pounds. He was a beautiful baby with his mother's light eyes and his father's dark hair. "He's perfect, Michael," Jennifer whispered, cradling their son. "He is, my love. Our family is complete now." Richard, Robert, and William visited Jennifer and the baby at the hospital on Sunday morning. It was the first time in weeks the whole family had gathered peacefully. "My grandson is very handsome," Richard said, holding John Michael in his arms. "He's strong like his grandfather," Robert remarked. "And smart like his mother," William added. For a moment, Michael let himself believe things might improve between him and his family. But when Richard called him aside in the hospital hallway, he realized he was wrong. "Michael, now that you're a father, you need to think more responsibly." "I am thinking, Dad. You have a child to support. You can't afford to keep playing around with dirt." "Dad, I'm not playing. I'm building a future for my family." "What future, son? You planted a few seeds in land that's never grown anything." "The seeds have already sprouted, Dad." Richard stopped walking and stared at Michael. "What did you say?" "I planted them on Monday. By Friday, when I brought Jennifer to the hospital, there were already shoots coming up." "It's probably just weeds, Michael." "They're not weeds. They're the vegetables I planted." Richard fell silent for a few seconds, processing the news. "Even if it's true, Michael, a few vegetable shoots won't support a family." "Dad, it's just the beginning. If the vegetables grow, I can plant bigger things." "Michael, listen to your father," Richard said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Accept the offer to sell the land. With the money, you can buy a house in town, get a steady job, and give your family a decent life." "Dad, give me a few more months. If it doesn't work, I'll sell." "A few months? Michael, you have a newborn." "That's exactly why I have to try, Dad. I want my son to grow up seeing his father fight for a dream." Richard sighed deeply. "You're more stubborn than your grandfather. Fine. 3 months, Michael. 3 months to prove you can make something grow on that land. If you can't, you sell to your brothers." On Monday, Michael returned to work at Dr. Anderson's ranch. Mrs. Johnson noticed right away that he seemed different. "Michael, you look like you haven't slept. Is something wrong?" "My son was born, Mrs. Johnson." "What joy? A boy or a girl?" "A boy, John Michael." "Congratulations, my boy. May God bless that baby." Michael told her about the birth, the family's visit, and the ultimatum his father had given. 3 months isn't much time to prove land can produce," Mrs. Johnson remarked. "I know, but it'll have to be enough." "Michael, can I give you a suggestion?" "Of course, Mrs. Johnson. Instead of just planting greens, you should plant some things that grow faster and give more visible results." "Like what?" "Cassava, sweet potatoes, corn. They're plants that grow fast and yield a lot." "But I don't have money to buy seedlings and seeds." Mrs. Johnson smiled. "Leave it to me. I'll talk to Dr. Anderson." That afternoon, when Dr. Anderson arrived at the farm, Mrs. Johnson brought up Michael's project. "Dr. Anderson, Michael is trying to restore degraded land using only organic methods." "Really? How's it going?" "Well, from what he said, but he needs seeds and seedlings to plant a wider variety of crops." Dr. Anderson was thoughtful for a moment. "You know what, Mrs. Johnson? I've always wanted to invest in a sustainable farming project. How about we partner with Michael?" "How so?" "I'll provide the seeds and seedlings he needs. In return, he sells me half the harvest at cost price." Michael could hardly believe it when Mrs. Johnson told him about Dr. Anderson's proposal. "He really wants to do this partnership." "Yes, he does. He said it's a way to support sustainable farming and still get fresh organic vegetables for his family." "Mrs. Johnson, this changes everything. With more plant variety, I can prove the land can really produce." "Then let's get to work, son. We'll make a list of what you need." Over the weekend, Michael was so excited he could barely sleep. Jennifer, even tired from caring for their newborn, insisted on going with him to the land to see the first plantings. "Michael, look how much they've grown," Jennifer exclaimed, seeing the lettuce plants with their vibrant green leaves. "And look at the color of the soil, Jennifer. It's much darker than before, it was true. The once gray, hard ground now had a deep brown hue and a softer texture. The composting techniques had really worked." "When will you plant the other crops?" "Next week. Dr. Anderson is sending cassava and sweet potato seedlings plus corn seeds." "Michael, I'm so proud of you. You've transformed this land in such a short time." "It's too early to celebrate, Jennifer, but I'm confident it'll all work out." The following Tuesday, Dr. Anderson arrived at the farm with a truck full of seedlings and seeds. "Michael, I brought everything you asked for. Cassava and sweet potato seedlings, corn, bean, and pumpkin seeds." "Dr. Anderson, how can I thank you?" "By making these plants grow strong and yielding plenty." "Oh, and I want you to document the whole process. Take photos, note the dates, measure the plant's growth. I'm curious to see the scientific results of your work." Michael spent the week planting the new crops in the prepared soil. Each seedling was placed carefully, following the spacing and depth instructions he'd learned from Mrs. Johnson. Robert and William passed by the property on Thursday and were surprised to see the activity. "What's all this, Michael?" William asked. "The new crops, cassava, sweet potatoes, corn, beans, and pumpkins." Robert got off his horse and walked over to the beds. "Gotta admit, it's organized, but that doesn't mean it'll produce." "We'll wait and see," Michael replied. "Michael, where'd you get the money to buy all this?" William asked. "I made a deal. Someone provided the seedlings in exchange for part of the harvest." "What deal?" "With my boss, Dr. Anderson." Robert and William exchanged worried glances. It was clear they hadn't expected Michael to get support for his project. "Well, we hope it works out for you," said Robert, but his tone suggested he wasn't rooting for his brother's success. The following Sunday, while Michael was watering the plants, he saw a familiar figure approaching down the road. It was Professor James, grandson of Joseph Miller. "Michael, how are the crops?" "Professor James, so good to see you. Come, I'll show you how everything's doing." Professor James walked through the beds, carefully observing each plant. "Impressive, Michael. How long did it take you to achieve this transformation?" 2 months preparing the soil, plus 1 month planting. The land looks completely different, very much like how my grandfather described it. "Professor, I have a question. Did your grandfather leave any notes about other techniques? Because I want to expand the planting, but I want to make sure I'm doing everything right." Professor James smiled. "Actually, yes. After you looked for the first notes, I went through the old papers back at my place. I found a few more interesting things." He pulled a folder from the bag he was carrying. "These are notes about fruit tree planting. My grandfather discovered that certain species adapted very well to the soil here." Michael flipped through the papers curiously. "Jaboticaba, mango, cashew, he really planted fruit trees?" "He did. And according to his notes, they produced very sweet and juicy fruit." "Professor, do you think I should try planting some fruit tree saplings?" "I think so, Michael, but there's something important I need to tell you." "What is it?" Professor James looked around as if making sure they were alone. "Yesterday, my neighbor told me your brothers are spreading rumors around town that your land is infested with pests." Michael felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "They're saying you're using banned pesticides, that the plants might be contaminated, that people shouldn't buy anything from your property." "But that's a lie. I only use organic methods." "I know it's a lie, Michael, but many people in town don't. And this could really hurt your sales when you start harvesting." Michael felt a mix of anger and despair. The tough land, the lack of family support, the financial struggles. Wasn't that enough? Now he had to deal with slander spread by his own brothers. "Professor, what can I do?" "You need proof that you're doing everything right. Documentation, photos, maybe even a technical report certifying that your methods are organic." "And where do I get that?" "At the Federal University. They have a soil analysis lab that can certify the quality of your land and your products." Michael spent the rest of Sunday thinking about his conversation with Professor James. On Monday, he spoke with Dr. Anderson about getting a technical report. Michael, that's an excellent idea. In fact, I have a friend who works at the Federal University. I can talk to him about doing a full analysis of your land. Dr. Anderson, that would be perfect. I'll call him today. He's an expert in organic farming and sustainability. On Wednesday, an agronomist from the university visited Michael's property to conduct the technical analysis. He was a young man around 35 named Dr. Wilson. "So you're the famous Michael trying to revive the cursed land," said Dr. Wilson with a smile. "Famous?" "Dr. Anderson told me about your project. I'm very curious to see the results." Dr. Wilson spent 3 hours on the property, collecting soil samples, photographing the plants, and taking detailed notes on the techniques Michael was using. "Michael, do you realize what you've accomplished here?" "Sort of. Why?" "This land was completely chemically unbalanced. The pH was too acidic, there was excess iron and a lack of nitrogen. From what I can see, you managed to correct all these issues using only organic methods." "So you mean everything's good?" "Better than good. It's exemplary. The plants are healthy, the soil is balanced, and there are no chemical residues. It's a perfect case of sustainable recovery of degraded land." Michael could hardly contain his joy. "Dr. Wilson, could you issue an official report certifying this?" "Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to ask your permission to use your project as a case study in my classes." "Of course. Feel free to use it." "Michael, one question. Would you be interested in expanding this project?" "How so?" "Planting a larger area, diversifying crops even more, maybe even setting up a direct sales system for the community." Michael had never thought so big before. "Is that possible?" "Definitely. You've already proven you know how to make the land productive. The next step is thinking on a commercial scale." That night, Michael told Jennifer about Dr. Wilson's visit and the possibilities that had opened up. "Michael, do you really think we can expand the project?" "I think so, Jennifer. Dr. Wilson said, what I did here is considered a model of sustainable farming. And if we expand, could we live off the land?" "We could live well, Jennifer. Better than I ever imagined." The following weekend, Michael got a surprise. Old Samuel, the farmer who had donated the manure, came to visit the property. "Michael, my boy, I came to see how your crops are doing." "Old Samuel, what a joy. Come, I'll show you everything." The old farmer walked slowly through the beds, observing every detail of the plants. "Good heavens, son. In 40 years of farming, I've never seen vegetables this beautiful growing on land everyone thought was worthless." "You think everything's all right?" "All right? Boy, this is perfect. Look at the size of these lettuce leaves, the color of this corn, the texture of this soil." Old Samuel bent down and scooped up a handful of dirt. "Michael, this land is alive. You brought it back to life." "There's still a long way to go before harvest, Old Samuel." "Not at all, son. From what I see, in about 2 weeks, you can start harvesting the first greens." "You really think so?" "I'm sure. And I'll tell you something, this harvest is going to surprise a lot of people." Old Samuel was right. In the second week of June, exactly 4 months after inheriting the cursed land, Michael made his first harvest. 50 heads of lettuce, all with large, crisp, deep green leaves, 30 bunches of arugula with a bold flavor and tender leaves, and 20 bunches of cilantro with a strong, fresh aroma. Jennifer was radiant when she saw Michael coming home with the first batch of greens. "Michael, they're beautiful. I've never seen vegetables this lovely." "Jennifer, this is just the beginning. In a month, I can harvest the corn, and in 3 months, the cassava and sweet potatoes. And now, how will we sell them?" "Dr. Anderson is taking half for himself. The other half, I'll take to the town market." On Saturday morning, Michael set up a small stand at the Blue Ridge Valley Farmers Market. It was a modest stall with just the greens he'd harvested, but he was proud of the result. The first people to stop by were locals, who wanted to know how Michael had managed to grow such beautiful vegetables. "Michael, is it true these greens came from that land your father left you?" asked Mrs. Campbell, a woman who'd known the family for years. "It's true, Mrs. Campbell. Would you like to try some?" Mrs. Campbell took a lettuce leaf and tasted it. My goodness, what flavor! This is so much tastier than the greens we usually buy. It's because they're organic vegetables, Mrs. Campbell. I don't use any kind of chemicals. The news spread quickly through the market. Within 2 hours, Michael had sold all the vegetables he'd brought. Some people even asked him to reserve produce for the following week. When Michael came home with the money from the sales, Jennifer was nursing John Michael on the porch. How was the market? Better than I expected. I sold everything in 2 hours. How much did you make? $250. Jennifer's eyes widened. $250 in vegetables? In just 2 hours? Yeah, Jennifer. And several people asked to reserve produce for next week. Michael, it means our land isn't cursed, far from it. It's special. On Monday, when Michael arrived at Dr. Anderson's farm, Mrs. Johnson greeted him with a big smile. Michael, Dr. Anderson couldn't stop talking about the vegetables you sent. He said he's never tasted lettuce so flavorful. Really? Yes. And there's more good news for you. What news? Dr. Anderson wants to expand the partnership. He wants you to supply vegetables for him every week, and for some of his friends too. How many friends? About 10 families, all people who value organic food and are willing to pay a good price for quality produce. Michael could hardly believe what he was hearing. Suddenly, what had started as a desperate attempt to make the land productive was turning into a thriving business. Mrs. Johnson, that would be amazing. So you accept? Of course I accept. Great. Dr. Anderson wants to talk with you this afternoon to work out the details. That afternoon, Michael met with Dr. Anderson to discuss expanding their partnership. The veterinarian was visibly excited about the results. Michael, your vegetables are exceptional. The flavor, texture, appearance, everything is perfect. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Here's what I propose. You supply organic vegetables for me and 10 more families every week. I'll handle organizing deliveries and collecting payments. You just focus on production. And how would the split work? 70% for you, 30% for me. By my estimates, that should give you about $2,000 a week. Michael nearly choked on the water he was drinking. $2,000 a week. That's a conservative estimate. If the quality stays this good, I can get more customers. Dr. Anderson, I accept the offer, but I have one problem. I'll need to expand the planting area to meet all this demand. How many acres do you have available? 15. But so far, I've only been using 2. Perfect. How about we invest in expanding? I'll provide the initial capital. You provide the labor and expertise. We split the profits 50-50. It was an offer that would completely change Michael and Jennifer's lives. From near poverty, they'd now have a substantial income doing exactly what Michael loved, organic farming. Dr. Anderson, I need to talk to my wife before giving a final answer. Of course, Michael. Think it over, but know that I have full confidence in your work's potential. That night, Michael and Jennifer stayed up late discussing Dr. Anderson's proposal. Michael, this is a dream come true, Jennifer said, rocking John Michael. It really is, honey, but it's also a big responsibility. If we accept, we can't afford to fail. Why would it fail? You've already proven you can make the land productive. But producing for a few people is different from producing on a commercial scale. Michael, you've learned so much these past months. You have Mrs. Johnson's support, Professor James's, Dr. Wilson's from the university. You're not alone in this. That's true. And if it works out, our son will grow up on a thriving property, never wanting for anything. So the decision is made? It's made. I'm accepting Dr. Anderson's offer. On Tuesday morning, Michael informed Dr. Anderson of his decision. The veterinarian was overjoyed. Excellent, Michael. Let's make this project a model of sustainable agriculture for the entire region. Dr. Anderson, when can we start the expansion? Right away, I can arrange for the machinery to prepare the additional land today. What about seeds and seedlings? I'll handle that too. Let's diversify even more. Tomatoes, bell peppers, eggplants, zucchini, okra. And how about planting some fruit trees as well? Michael remembered Professor James's notes about the fruit trees Joseph Miller used to plant. I think that's a great idea. I even have some guidance on which species adapt best to the soil here. That same week, Michael's property turned into a construction site. Tractors prepared 5 additional acres of land, following all the composting and organic techniques Michael had developed. News of the expansion spread quickly through the region. Some people were curious, others skeptical, and some were clearly bothered. Robert and William were the most troubled. On Thursday, they showed up at Michael's property for the first time since production had begun. "Michael, what's all this commotion?" Robert asked, eyeing the tractors working the land. "I'm expanding production. I found a partner to invest in the project." "What partner?" "Dr. Anderson, a veterinarian from Bozeman." William dismounted his horse and walked through the beds where the first plants were growing. "Gotta admit, the plants look good," he remarked. "They're more than good," Michael said proudly. "They're perfect." Robert didn't seem happy at all with what he was seeing. "Michael, this Dr. Anderson, does he know our family has other land for sale? Better land than this?" "Robert, he's not interested in buying land. He's interested in my organic farming work." "Organic farming?" Robert shook his head. "There's always someone willing to throw money at these fads." "It's not a fad, Robert, it's science. I have a report from the State University proving the quality of my work." "A university report?" Michael went to the house and returned with a folder containing the full report Dr. Wilson had prepared on his property. "Look here. Exemplary project for rehabilitating degraded soil using exclusively sustainable organic methods." Robert read the document silently, his expression growing tighter. "And what does Dad think about all this?" "Dad doesn't know about the latest developments yet, but he will soon." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to invite him to see the production. I want to show him that the land everyone thought was cursed could be the most productive in the region." William and Robert exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear Michael's success was disrupting their plans. "Michael, one question," William said. "Do you plan to expand production even further?" "I do. Why?" "Well, we were thinking of using some of our land for farming too." Michael understood immediately what was happening. His brothers had underestimated organic farming's potential and now wanted in on the business. "You're free to do whatever you want with your land," Michael said. "Yeah, but we don't know much about organic farming," Robert admitted. "Right. You couldn't give us a few tips, could you?" William added. Michael looked at his 2 brothers who just a few months earlier had mocked him and bet on his failure. Now they were asking for help. "I can help you, sure, but there's one condition." "What condition?" "You stop spreading lies about my farm around town." Robert lowered his eyes, clearly embarrassed. We were worried about you, Michael." "Worried or jealous?" William stepped forward. "All right, Michael. We were wrong. Can you help us start an organic farming project?" "I can, but first, I want you to help me with something." "What?" "I want you to help me prepare a surprise for Dad." The following Saturday, Michael organized a big demonstration at his property. He invited Richard, Professor James, Dr. Anderson, Dr. Wilson from the university, Mrs. Johnson, Old Samuel, and several neighbors and acquaintances from the area. The idea was to publicly show that the cursed land had been transformed into a model sustainable farm. Richard arrived at the property at 9 in the morning, wearing his best leather hat and with a curious expression on his face. It had been months since he'd visited that part of the farm. "Good morning, son." "Thanks for coming." "Good morning, Dad. What's all this commotion?" "It's a demonstration, Dad. I want to show you and everyone else what I've managed to do with the land you gave me." Richard looked around, and his expression gradually shifted from curiosity to surprise, and from surprise to astonishment. Where there had once been only rocks and dry brush, there now stretched an orderly, thriving plantation. Perfect rows of greens, vegetables, and fruit-bearing plants covered 7 acres. "My God," Richard murmured. "Dad, I want you to meet some of the people who helped me with this project." Michael introduced his father to Dr. Anderson, Dr. Wilson, Professor James, and all the other guests. Each of them spoke about the technical and scientific aspects of the work Michael had done. "Your son has achieved something extraordinary," said Dr. Wilson. "He restored degraded land and turned it into a model farm using only sustainable techniques. I've never seen such impressive results in such a short time, added Dr. Anderson. Professor James approached Richard. Mr. Thompson, my grandfather would have been so happy to see this land producing again. Michael has honored his memory. Richard walked slowly through the fields, touching the plants, feeling the texture of the soil, observing the fruits forming. Michael, how long did it take you to do all this? 5 months, Dad. 5 months since I planted the first seeds. And how much is it yielding? Dr. Anderson, could you tell my dad about the numbers? Mr. Thompson, Michael is producing organic vegetables of the highest quality. Demand is so high that we're expanding to serve more customers. The monthly income already exceeds $8,000. Richard stopped walking and stared at Michael. $8,000 a month. It's just the beginning, Dad. With the expansion we're working on, the income could reach $15,000 a month by the end of the year. Michael, Richard seemed to search for words. I didn't know this was possible. Robert and William, who had been quietly following the demonstration, approached their father. Dad, we were wrong, said Robert. We doubted Michael when we should have supported him. It's true, Dad, William agreed. Michael proved he's the best farmer in the family. Richard looked at his 3 sons. His hands, calloused from decades of working the land, trembled slightly. Michael, you've taught me a lesson I'll never forget. What lesson, Dad? That a man's worth isn't in how easy things come to him, but in the determination he shows when things get tough. Richard took off his hat and held it against his chest. I owe you an apology, son. I gave you the worst land because I thought you lacked ambition, but you turned this land into the best property in the region. Michael felt his eyes filling with tears. Dad, you don't need to apologize. You gave me exactly what I needed, a challenge that made me discover what I was capable of. Michael, I want to make you an offer. What offer? I want you to become the manager of all the family's land. You know techniques none of us do. Robert and William immediately agreed. We agree, Dad. Michael understands farming better than any of us. And we want to learn from him, William added. Dr. Wilson approached the group. Mr. Thompson, may I make a suggestion? Of course, Doctor. How about turning the entire ranch into a hub for organic farming? We could host students, offer courses, and conduct scientific research. It's a fantastic idea, said Professor James. It would be a way to preserve knowledge and honor the memory of the old farmers in this region. Richard looked at Michael again. Son, what do you think? I think it would be incredible, Dad. We could help other farmers learn these techniques. Then it's settled, said Richard, extending his hand to Michael. Do you accept being the manager of all the family's land? Michael firmly shook his father's hand. I accept, Dad, and I promise I'll make every acre produce as much as this one. At that moment, Jennifer arrived carrying John Michael in her arms. The baby was awake, curiously watching all the activity. Michael, how's the demonstration going? Better than I ever dreamed, sweetheart. Richard walked over to Jennifer and asked to hold his grandson. John Michael, you have a very special father, said Richard, cradling the baby. A father who never gives up on his dreams. The baby smiled, as if understanding his grandfather's words. And you'll grow up in a prosperous, fertile land that your father transformed with his own sweat, Richard continued. Dr. Anderson approached Michael. Michael, I have news that will make you even happier. What news? I got in touch with an organic supermarket chain in Bozeman. They want to buy your entire harvest. The entire harvest, all of it, and they'll pay 30% above market price because they value certified organic products. Michael looked at Jennifer, who was radiant with happiness. Michael, this means our lives are about to change completely, she said. They already have, Jennifer. They already have. Professor James came to Michael with a special suggestion. Michael, I'd like to propose something symbolic. What is it? How about we plant a tree in honor of my grandfather? A black cherry tree, his favorite fruit. That's a beautiful idea, Professor James. Everyone present took part in planting the black cherry tree. Each person placed a handful of soil around the young sapling. a symbol that they were all contributing to the growth and prosperity of the land. "This tree will grow strong and bear sweet fruit," said Richard, "just like the family Michael is building here." By the end of the demonstration, when all the guests had left, Michael stood alone with Jennifer and John Michael on the land he had transformed. "Jennifer, do you remember when we first got here?" "I do. I cried in despair seeing so many rocks and dry brush." "And now?" Jennifer looked around, seeing lush green plants stretching as far as the eye could see. "Now I see the most beautiful place in the world, the place where our son will grow up happy." "Jennifer, I want to make you a promise." "What promise?" "I promise I'll keep working this land with the same love and dedication until the day John Michael takes over. And I promise I'll always be by your side, supporting all your dreams." They embraced as the sun set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the fields that stretched across the land once thought to be cursed. 7 months after inheriting what had seemed like a humiliation, Michael Thompson had proven that there are no impossible lands, only people who don't know how to work with them. The land everyone had scorned was now the most prosperous property in the region, and Michael had become the most respected farmer in Blue Ridge Valley. But what mattered most wasn't the profits or the recognition. What mattered was proving to himself, his family, and his son that with determination, knowledge, and hard work, any challenge can be overcome. The land wasn't cursed. It was simply waiting for someone who understood its secrets and worked with it, not against it. And Michael had been exactly that person. The end. So what did you think of this incredible story of perseverance? Michael managed to turn land everyone saw as worthless into a thriving property, proving that with determination and knowledge there are no limits. Tell us in the comments, do you believe it's possible to restore land like this in real life? And don't forget to like if this transformation moved you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories like this one.